Section 20 of The Emotions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Tim Rowe. The Emotions by James McCosh. Section 20. Continuous Emotions, Part 1. Chapter 1. Continuous Emotions. Section 1. Affections and Passions. Down to this point, we have been looking at single emotions, but we cannot comprehend our nature till we view the feelings operating continuously or in combination. This will be felt by many as a more interesting study, for it brings us into actual contact with human life, into the society of men and women, where the motives are always mixed, often very complex. Shakespeare is true to human nature when he brings apparently incongruous moods and passions, say gravity and levity, so close together. Scott is drawing from life when he places on the same person and at the same time the smile on the lips and the tear in the eye. The continued emotions are commonly called affections and passions. These phrases are used somewhat vaguely. Affection is the word used when we speak of a disposition benignant and commendable, and going forth towards living beings. It often signifies the same as love. Thus we speak of the affection of a mother for her son. Passion is the word used when the disposition is more doubtful in its nature, and may be towards unconscious objects. We talk of people being in a passion when they are angry, and having a passion for gambling or for hunting. Both embrace more than a single emotion, or even than a repetition of the emotion. They imply an abiding principle, that is, a deeply seated appetence, which ever tends to act. They are of the nature of a river with many streams flowing into it. How many brooks join in the affection of a mother for her child, or the passion of a gambler for play? In the combination implied in affection and passion, association of ideas prompted by the abiding appetence always plays an important part, and collects a host of concomitants and consequences. When a man is in a passion, what a flight of thoughts, like that of wild beasts pursuing their prey, of the indignity that has been heaped upon him, of the loss he has sustained, of the injustice or meanness of the one who has perpetrated all this, and the necessity of resisting or resenting or of punishing the offender. When a mother hears of the death of her son, what a concourse of gloomy images, like that of birds gathering to the carcass. When we learn of a favourite project of ours being successful, what a fluttering like that of doves to their windows. What a quiver full of keen instruments, of the greed of gain, of the determination not to be beaten, the craving for excitement to drown reflection, in the power that is driving on the man, who is all the while conscious that he is doing wrong, to the gambling table with the hoards of money spread out upon it, and his competitors ready for the contest. Section 2. Love. I have not placed love among the simple emotions. In a loose sense it may take in all the emotions. We may be said in a general way to love. That is, we have an attachment to all the persons and objects towards which we have an appetence. The miser loves his wealth, and the tyrant his power, and the vain man the applause that is offered him. Taken in this sense, love is not a separate appetence, but a term designating a characteristic of all the grateful appetences of our nature. But we denote something much more peculiar when we speak of that love that is a virtue, or rather a grace, and this is the very highest grace. In this love to living beings, to God or to man, there is always more than mere emotion. There is an act of the will, and here it is of importance to distinguish between emotion and will. In the former there is, we have seen, excitement, with attachment or repugnance. But in will there is choice, or the opposite of choice, rejection. Two objects are before us, and we choose the one and reject the other. Or there may be will where there is only one object before us. We may, as it were, adopt it at once. The will may assume lower or higher forms. It may exist in the simple form of wish. We wish to attain this pleasure or this honor, which may or may not be attainable. Or we may form a determination to attain it. This is volition, the consummating exercise of the will. Now, in all love considered as a virtue or grace, there is will. There will, it is true, be an appetence or emotion, commonly or always. But affection does not deserve the name of love, which mounts no higher than mere feeling. In all genuine love there is well-wishing. There is benevolence. We wish well what we believe to be good towards the person beloved. In love we would do good to our neighbor. We would promote the glory of God. To bring out this, we may distinguish between love considered as mere attachment, which we may call the love of complacency, and love considered as well-wishing, that is, benevolence. The former is a mere emotion, which may or may not be virtuous. The latter is an act of our voluntary nature, and is a virtue, is the very highest virtue. The greatest of these is charity. But the full discussion of this subject should fall under the subject of will, and not of emotion. Section 3. Love of the sexes. Here there is emotion, or rather affection, with its various elements. There is always an excitement with an attachment. Here there may also be wish or will. We should wish all that is good to the person beloved. But this is not the speciality of the affection which we are now contemplating. We may have all this towards a sister. In the affection of those whom we describe as lovers, there is always a sexual appetence working to a greater or lesser extent, consciously or unconsciously, allowed or restrained. In a well-regulated mind, the bodily appetite should always be subordinated to the mental emotion and to the well-wishing. When it is so, it may become an element in a very exalted affection. It appears earlier, but comes forth fully at puberty, when it helps to give full form to the body, and to call forth many affections, to impart new motives, and to evoke varied energies. All along it leads us to delight in the presence and cherish the image of the loved one, and to devise and engage in many efforts to please and to gratify. As fusing body and mind, it may become one of the strongest, deepest, and most influential of the passions of our nature. The continuance of the bodily inclination helps to give a permanence to the affection which prompts to activity to secure affection in return, or when this is not to be had, ending in wasting of the body, in disappointment and irritation of soul, and at times in death or even in self-destruction. In such cases love travels like the simoom, heated, colored, and destructive. Neither psychologists nor physiologists have been able to tell us what it is precisely which leads a man and woman to cherish a special love for one another. They have left this very much to novelists, to whom it has furnished their richest stock in trade, but who are not competent to analyze for us the varied and subtle elements at work. It may be allowed to physiologists that there is a bodily appetence underneath, calling forth and working with specially mental powers. But in all that deserves the hallowed name of love, there are far nobler appetences than those sensual and selfish ones, which attract a man to a paramour or to a harlot. What are these? This is a difficult question to answer. We may, however, safely answer that the perception of beauty in man or woman on the part of the opposite sex is undoubtedly one of the most potent prompters of love. There is a beauty of person, expression, and manner which is apt to impress all, and the possessor of it draws the eyes and the admiration of all of the opposite sex. These, when of the male sex, are apt to become vain, and when of the female sex to become coquettes, loving to gain hearts, only to crush them. Then there are men and women who have an attraction only to certain persons, and, it may be, to no others. These, if they fall in with those whom they can love in return and respect, may be more fortunate than those who are universal favorites, and are distracted by the attention paid them. There are some who never could love any but one person, who happily may, or unfortunately may not, love them in return. Love is often kindled by love. We are apt to love those who first love us. This can easily be explained. The idea of a person cherishing an affection for us makes us feel the person attractive. It has to be added that when this love is shown on the part of those whom we cannot love, it is apt to produce aversion, as we are afraid of being troubled with them. In all cases, love is increased when it is reciprocated. The person loved has now a farther attraction, and the mutual affection may bind the parties by links that cannot be broken. may bind husband and wife in a union which death only can dissolve, nay, which even death cannot dissolve. There are instances of the love continuing and increasing even when it has met with no response, leading to sorrow which refuses to be comforted, and to pining and wasting of the body. These affections, while they furnish some of the very highest enjoyments of life, may be the means of inflicting the direst disappointment, when the persons do not fall in with those whom they could love and who would love them in return, when they cannot love those who love them or be loved of those whom they love. Our question is not yet answered. What draws lovers together? There is often a likeness between the parties, but quite as frequently there is a marked difference. The tall man chooses the little woman, or the short woman falls in love with the tall man. The restless man selects a quiet partner, and the timid woman puts herself under a bold protector. Yet it would be an error on the opposite side to say that love, like polar force, attracts the unlike. There must be something in the parties that draws them towards each other. There are tastes and predilections natural, often hereditary, which find their correlates and a gratified satisfaction in persons of the opposite sex. It may not be a similarity or a dissimilarity, but it is, as it is commonly called, an affinity of some kind. This may often be like the correspondence of tallies, by which they fit into each other. The protuberance fills the cavity, the hook goes into the eye, the passivity is roused by the activity, which again finds repose in the passivity, and the forward impulse is met by the receptivity. The dull man often likes to have a lively wife who has music or amusements, or a cheerful remark to entertain him when he comes home from his toils, and a woman of a calm or sluggish temperament is pleased to be roused by a playful husband who brings home to her the incidents of the day, the news or the scandal. But there are limits to this fitness of opposites to blend with each other. The woman's liveliness, while at proper seasons it relieves the husband, must not be so constant as to disturb his habitual soberness, and the man's bantering must not be made, like a perpetual firing of rockets, to disturb the woman's complacency, or the wit to oppress her with a sense of her inferiority. I have noticed that affection is apt to be kindled and is always strengthened when the train of ideas in the two minds are consonant. This makes the strings to harmonize, and on the other hand, disturbance is apt to be produced when the association of ideas in the one jars upon that of the other. In all cases, the love is apt to be more permanent when the tastes of the persons, when the courses they pursue, and the ends they keep in view are alike, or rather when they correspond and cooperate, as one workman does with another in a factory. It is scarcely necessary to remark that the tendency of mutual love in all cases is to draw the persons together in mind and in body, in conversation and in embrace when they are together, and in correspondence when they are separated, in communion of thought, and in tokens and expressions of affection, till they become, as it were, merged in one another, and almost feel as if they were one. Section 4. Emotions coming up in groups. I have already noticed the fact that ideas become associated in clusters. An idea may have become the attracting center of a whole body of others, each of which is emotional. When that idea starts up, the whole train comes with it. We often wonder to find someone breaking out into a burst of passion without any cause or occasion known to us. But if we were acquainted with the history of the man, we could account for the whole. The idea has gathered round it a whole body of feelings, which come in with it, and it is thus ready as a spark to kindle a conflagration. There are emotional ideas which raise excitement as readily as substances covered with pitch take fire. We have had an unfortunate collision with a man, and when he suddenly comes in contact with us, the pent-up feelings burst out as liquor does from a vessel when it is tapped. Or he has offended us in one of our ruling passions, and henceforth when we think of him we have the memory of his act of supposed ill usage, and of our mortifications and disappointments. A disappointment or a triumph, a loss or a gain, a reproach, a compliment, a success or a humiliation may thus have become glued to a place or an event which will introduce its concomitant. It may be inopportunely and in spite of our efforts to prevent it. Some have anniversaries of fortunes or misfortunes, of marriages or of deaths, which bring with them crowded feelings, sweet as clusters of grapes or agitated as waves struggling in a creek. We are liable to bursts of feeling such as that which moves the breast of the mother as she comes upon a memorial of her departed son, say the prize won by him in his opening youth ere he was taken from her, or the sword which he wielded so bravely in the battle in which he was slain. Such are the thoughts, mirthful and melancholy, which rise up and chase each other like a flock of birds, as the engrossed man visits the scenes of childhood from which he has been so long separated. Such is the mountain torrent which bursts out when the sailor's wife is told that she is a widow. There is a cataract when a prize of honour or power or wealth, long looked for, goes to a rival, or when the merchant has suffered a loss which he knows must make him bankrupt. Thus are we liable not only to moments of feeling, but to moods, continuing for longer or shorter time, of hope or of fear, of joy or of sorrow. Everyone must have noticed persons who have been for hours in a state of cheerfulness or even hilarity, disposed to be pleased with everything, suddenly becoming silent or morose or cross-tempered or contradictory, without a cause being discovered by a neighbour or by the man himself. People say it is a change of temper, and so it is, but we must look deeper. It may so far proceed from a stomachic or some other organic derangement, but there is a deeper element. It proceeds from the intrusion of an idea with a gangrene of feelings, and this has given a new turn to the flow of thought which generates a mood which may continue for hours. Section 5. Temperament. This is to a large extent organic and implies nervous action, but mental action mingles. Many great men have been liable to fits of despondency, to moods of melancholy. Such men have commonly had some high or deep aim. This may be theoretical or it may be practical. It may be benevolent or it may be selfish. It may contemplate a present or remote good. One man would build up a large fortune, another a lasting reputation, another would climb a height of ambition. One has his mind filled with what is to live forever. Another expects to make a great scientific discovery. A third is rearing a new system of philosophy. This one is to be a merchant who will trade with all quarters of the globe. This other is to be a great lawyer and sit on the bench of the Supreme Court. A third is to be a great statesman and determine the destinies of a country. That fourth is to be a brilliant orator to sway masses of men. And the fifth, a gallant soldier and a mighty conqueror. But then things in this world do not always fall out according to the wishes and expectations even of the most far-sighted. Accidents will occur to stop them, and opposition will come from quarters from which aid was expected. Under such circumstances, weak minds will be apt to give up the effort. Stronger spirits will persevere, but as they do so they may have their prostrations, occasional or periodical. Mohammed will have his fits and retire into a cave, not to abandon the project, but to brood over it. In such a position the eager man feels like the eagle in its cage, like the prisoner in the dungeon beating upon the walls that restrain him, and anxious to break them. Aristotle has remarked that men of genius are often of melancholy temperament. We can understand this. They do not find their high ideal realized in the world, and they retire within themselves or retreat to some shade whose melancholy gloom accords with their soul's sadness. In some cases of this description, the cloud comes down lower and lower upon the mountain, and at last wraps the whole soul in thickest mist or dismal gloom. But when there is buoyancy, the man comes forth from his retreat to some great work, as David did from the cave of Adullam, as Luther did after his depression the night before he had to face the great emperor and the diet of worms. As one of the incongruities but not contradictions of human character, it often happens that the man under gloom is liable in the reaction to fits of merriment, which come out from him like electric sparks to give a grim light in the darkness. It was thus that John Knox, that Oliver Cromwell, and Abraham Lincoln had their outbursts of levity in the midst of their habitual seriousness. From much the same causes we find at times our depressed and melancholy men to be very kind, sympathetic, and benevolent. They may wear a downcast look, they may dwell in a gloomy atmosphere, they may rather repel the young and frighten the frivolous. But underneath the encrusting ice is a flowing stream which cannot be frozen. Their benevolence has so often been received with ingratitude, their attempts to do good have so often failed, that their look has become somewhat forbidding. But beyond and within there is a loving and generous heart. End of section 20.
Section 21 of the Emotions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Rusty Pistols. The Emotions by James McCosh. Continuous Emotions, Part 2. Section 6, Temper. Our key opens other secrets of character. We can explain what is meant by temper. This may arise in part from bodily irritation, from a disordered alimentary canal or stomach. A diseased organism is sure to have seeds in it which breed ephemera. The attacks may individually be exceedingly small, but like those of the gnat, may be exceedingly uncomfortable. The person may be under its influence without knowing it. Incipient disease in children is often detected by a restlessness of temper. The mother knows that her boy needs the visit of a doctor when he is fretful, and relief comes and the spirit rises when the irritating cause is removed. It is the same all our lives. The dyspeptic feels depressed and easily disturbed. The woman of bilious temperament and liable to nervous headaches is restless and yet indisposed to action, and is apt to get angry when compelled to make exertion. Much of commonplace human happiness springs from the vital organs acting healthily and encouraging a pleasant flow of spirits, and much of our wretchedness from the same organs interrupted in their natural action. The uneasiness is partly pathological, but is greatly intensified by the interference with the pleasant flow of association. Your disagreeable, unpopular people are often those who have annoyances in their own frame, which make them as disagreeable to themselves as they are to others. Temper springs fundamentally from disappointed appetences. It is most apt to be displayed by those who have come under the sway of a great many small attachments, ever liable to be ruffled, especially when they cling round near objects, round their children, or personal ease, or aggrandizement, or social rank and status, or dress, or furniture, or equipage, all liable to be disturbed from day to day or from hour to hour. The person is prepared to sit down to a pleasant meal, or enjoy a quiet hour with his family, or commit himself to rest at night, when an unexpected event breaks in upon him like a burglar to make him flee or fight. Or he has a favorite opinion and someone contradicts him, or he meets with opposition where he expected assistance, or the exertions he makes and the favors he bestows are received with ingratitude, and the man is put into a state of irritation which makes him disagreeable to himself and all who come in contact with him. The temper once kindled will be apt to throw out sparks towards all who are near, towards children and servants and neighbors, towards all who come across the man, though they may have had no connection with the original disturbance. But ever after the small violent stern rankled in him and ruffled all his heart, as the sharp wind that ruffles all day long a little bitter pool about a stone on the bare coast. Such is the experience when the appetences are numerous and small, the character is weak and may become contemptible. The energy is wasted in the heat of small molecular motion, or expresses itself in spitting sparks. Section 7. Prepossessions. A strong affection creates a prepossession in favor of whatever promotes it. We have had pleasure in the presence of certain objects. They have gratified our tastes and fallen in with our predilections, and associations gather around them. And when they come before us, we are prepared to welcome them, and at all times we think and expect favorably of them. We have a warm heart towards our birthplace, towards the scenes in which we have passed our younger years, and towards our home. The affectionate husband and wife will delight to visit the spot in which they spent their honeymoon. We are apt to delight in those who have a pleasant countenance, a genial temper, or a lively, a differential, or a flattering manner. Some have a preference for those who have a frank or brusque address, or who are candid in their opinions, or have an honest way of expressing themselves. Others are rather drawn to those who are affectionate and tender in their feelings. All delight in the society of those for whom they have such predilections, do not willingly believe evil of them, and are inclined to copy them. The father and mother are disposed to think favorably of the character of their sons and daughters, do not readily listen to an evil report of them, and will believe what they say when they would not credit the same tale told by a stranger. It is proverbial that love has a blinding influence, and the woman under its power trusts the vows of her lover, who may thereby become her seducer. We willingly attend to the arguments urged in behalf of causes which seem to promote our pleasures or flatter our self-esteem. He is likely to be a favorite in private and in public, to be in fact the popular man, more so than a great and good man, who may rather excite envy, as interfering with our inordinate self-esteem, whose manner and style of address are such that those whom he meets go away better pleased with themselves. It is said that those who got a refusal from Charles II of England went away better pleased than were those who had their requests granted by his father, and no doubt this helped to make the one die in prosperity while the other perished on a scaffold. The flatterer gains his end by speaking to us of our real or imagined good qualities. But it may happen unfortunately, or rather I should say fortunately, that we come to discover that he pays the like compliments to others, and we turn away with disgust as from one who has been trying to deceive us. The courtier studies the weaknesses of those whose favor he would gain and addresses himself to them, but may find that caprices of the pampered man of power become in the end intolerable. That man is not likely to be a successful agent in a good cause who sends away those whom he would gain in a humbled and repining humor. The ardent man stimulates others because he imparts to them some of the magnetic power which is in himself. There is sure to be a terrible disappointment and perhaps even a disposition towards revenge and retaliation, when those whom our imaginations have clothed with such excellent qualities, or whom we suppose to be our friends, are seen to be unworthy or have turned out to be foes. Section 8. Prejudice. It presupposes certain tendencies, convictions, affections, or purposes which have been thwarted, and then all that is associated with the disappointments raise malign feelings which often lead to unjustifiable conduct. There are scenes at which we have suffered a humiliation or experienced a sorrow, and we ever afterwards avoid them. Or there are people who have knowingly or unknowingly, justly or unjustly offended us, who have made us see their superiority and our inferiority, who have lowered us in our own estimation, who have wounded us in a tender part, who have crossed our favorite ends, who have injured or maligned us, or beat us in the rivalries of trade, or the competitions, social or literary, of life. And henceforth we look askance upon them, are apt to feel uncomfortable in their presence, and to imagine them to be actuated by ugly motives towards us. This feeling is especially apt to rise in the breasts of those who have injured anyone in his good name or estate. They fear that he may take revenge and do them mischief. In these ways, prejudice is excited against not only individuals, but classes, against trades, professions, grades of society, the rich fearing the poor and the poor envying the rich, against political parties, religious sects, against races white or colored, against states and nations. The Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans. This prejudice, wrong in itself, is sure to lead to evil conduct. These antipathies are one of the principal sources of quarrels, feuds, and wars. Men clothe their enemies with evil qualities, as Nero clothed the early Christians with the skins of wild beasts, or covered them with pitch and then destroyed them. We see the feeling working in more common cases. We do not listen patiently to the arguments urged by those who, for any cause, say by their misconduct or our misapprehension of it, have given us offense. We become predisposed against causes which have injured our prospects. The publican is not likely to feel an interest in the cause of temperance, nor the protectionist in free trade, nor the licentious man in the correction of vice, nor the infidel in the defenses of religion, nor the calumniator in the recital of the excellent deeds of one whom he has reviled. Herod readily granted the request of the damsel who danced before him, and her mother prompted her to ask the head of John the Baptist, who had audaciously declared that it is not lawful for thee to have thy brother's wife. The perverse boy comes to detest the faithful teacher who has admonished him so often. Politicians are apt to speak against the party which hinders them in their schemes of patriotic or personal aggrandizement. Or, what is to be explained, on much the same principles, they turn with a strong revulsion against the party which they have long favored, but which, as they think, has overlooked them or kept them down or ill-used them. We can thus explain the mistaken zeal, often the antipathies of the convert or pervert. We have here the key to open the secrets of some of the contradictions, so-called, of human nature, in persons bitterly reviling and persecuting the causes which at one time they clamorously supported. We have a still more lamentable issue, when the man comes to quarrel with his own conscience and learns to hate the duty which it will lead him to do, but which he refuses to do. Not willing to listen to the reprover, he would hasten to tear out his tongue that it may no longer rebuke him. Section 9. Fickleness of feeling. Everyone must have come in contact with people who have feelings of a certain kind strong and lively. but who soon lose them and become apathetic or fall under emotions of different, perhaps of an opposite kind. Today they seem to be full of affection for us and load us with expressions of regard. Tomorrow they are turned away from us and meet us with opposition or enmity, and are perhaps lavishing their friendship on others for whom they had no regard before. There are people of whom this chameleon liability of change of affection is characteristic. They will be found to be persons with no very decided or deep motive principles, and whose emotions are very much determined by outward circumstances. Commonly they are swayed by a number of not very strong appetences, taking the direction which external events working on an irrepressible nervous temperament give them. At this present time they are deeply interested in some person or end, great or small, but the seed is sown in stony places, and having no depth of earth, it speedily withers away. New circumstances appear, unexpected difficulties spring up. As they prosecute, the cause or the person beloved gives offence, and the interest is ready to collect round some other objects. Such people appear very inconsistent, and so they are, and they do not gain our permanent confidence, but they are, after all, acting consistently with their character, which goes by impulses and jerks, and not by steady principle. Section 10. Ruling Passions. The young are apt to live under the influence of considerable number of lighter impulses, moving the spirit as the ocean is rippled into wavelets by the fires. Now it is affection to father, mother, sister, brother, companion. Now it is some sense of duty. Now it is a desire to win esteem and to dazzle. Now it is a sheer love of activity and excitement, as in play, in leaping and dancing. As they advance in years, they become soberer, partly from the less lively flow of the animal spirits, but mainly from the streams being collected into a few formed and settled channels. The fountains and streamlets that originally start and feed our streams are beyond calculation in number, but as they flow, they meet and unite in great rivers. So the numberless impulses of youth settle into a few habitual modes of action. In middle age, the earning of one's bread, the cares of household, business of life, the common services and civilities due to neighbors and friends demand and engross the greater portion of the motive energy. In declining life, the grave man and woman commonly center their regards on a few ends which they pursue, having seen the vanity of many of those which captivated them in their younger years, though some of those which they cling to may turn out to be as unsatisfactory as those which they have abandoned. Youth might be painted as with the question ever in their mouths, "Who will show us any good?" And you see them running to every spot where others are collected, and gathering round every fire of crackling wood that is kindled. But there are many exceptions to this general account. There are boys and girls who have sobriety in their character and manner from the beginning, either because they are governed by some serious principle or principles, or because they have no very strong passions. They are your boys with aged faces which recommend them to grave seniors, but keep them from being popular with their coevals, who prefer the lively, the gay, and the roistering. In like manner, there are old men and women who retain their interest in occupations which enable them to retain their youthful character and bring them into sympathy with children. There are cases in which one passion is strong, or a few passions are strong, in themselves or relatively to others, and they claim and gain a governing potency and reign without a rival, or with a rival which they keep down. It is a devotion of a boy to his play, or of a girl to her father. It may be in poverty or in wretched health, or of a mother to her son. It may be helplessly invalid or deformed, or of the merchant to his business, or of a farmer to his land, or of a physician to his profession, or of a scientist to his researches, or of a philosopher to his speculation, or of the painter, sculptor, or architect to his art, or of the patriot to his country, or of the politician to his party, or of the successful soldier to military aggrandizement, or of the ecclesiastic to his church, or of the Christian to the glory of God. The passion, as a center, aggregates a crowd of associations, and it moves on like a marshaled host, with the combined strength of the whole bearing down the obstacles which oppose. Those thus impelled are often distinguished by their energy, for good or for evil, according to the nature of the affection. Among them are to be found your strong lovers and good haters. They often accomplish ends in heaping up wealth, in doing brilliant feats, in making scientific discoveries which could not have been effected by men of equal intellectual ability, but without the concentrated energy. They strike out a path with themselves, like Lochinvar they swim the river, where ford there is none. The man with one clear line before him has much the same advantages as a railway carriage has over one on a common road, and he moves along with the determination of a steam train on the rails set for it. Sometimes the ruling power imparts a sublimity to things that are not grand in themselves. Thus the love of the mother, as she forgets her personal safety in defending her children, makes the weak woman strong, odd, heroic. In other cases, the strong ambitions being attached to weak capacities make the person ridiculous, as the ambition of Charles XII of Sweden did. But when there is any corresponding intellectual power, strong characters are produced, such as those of Alexander, Julius Caesar, Cromwell, Napoleon, or belonging to a different order, Paul or Knox or Milton, or among females as Semiramis, Cleopatra, Queen Elizabeth, and Queen of Russia. These affections, like the great rivers of the world, the Nile, the Ganges, the Mississippi, the Amazon, drain vast regions and draw the waters into one great stream, which moves along with irresistible power. This ruling passion may become terrible in its power, carrying all before it like a swollen river with torturing eddies, sucking all things as into a whirlpool, or devouring all around like the conflagration of a city. Hidden it may be from the eye, but when an object strikes it or a spark is applied to it, it bursts forth into an explosion of passion like that of a powder magazine. In other cases, the dynamic is compressed towards a point which it strikes like a bullet. Those impelled by this dominant power are commonly the men and women who have had the largest share in swaying the destinies of the world. When it is evil, or when it is exclusive and not restrained by other powers meant to limit it, it may work intolerable evil, wasting household and provinces and nations, spreading rapine and misery. When it is a selfish passion, it may wither or consume the natural affections, lead parents who are superstitious to make their children pass through sacrificial fires, and persons naturally kind-hearted to become relentless persecutors and conquerors when resisted to order the murder of myriads of innocent women and children. On the other hand, when it is good, benevolence will flow from it as rays do from the sun, and scatter a beneficent influence over a wide region, whereby vices are restrained, means are provided for healing the sick, outcasts are reclaimed, and the poor have their wants supplied. It has to be added that few are so deeply under the dominion of one passion as to prevent others from occasionally coming in and giving a so-called personality, a supposed incongruity or contradiction to the character, as we have seen the miser doing a generous deed to a child or neighbor for whom he has taken a fancy, and the thief giving his money to persons in distress, and the murderer saving the lives of individuals in whom he has become interested. These peculiarities act merely as the abutting rocks at the ledges of a river, raising a ruffling here and there, but allowing the stream all the while to flow on with uncontrollable power. End of section 21.
Section 22 of The Emotions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by T.R. Love. The Emotions by James McCosh. Motives Swaying Masses. Section 1. Community of Feeling. It is a familiar fact that feeling is apt to be increased when it is shared by others. How are we to account for this? It is customary to refer it to sympathy, to an attraction or a contagion of feeling. But these are loose metaphors, expressions pointing to an important fact, but failing to untwine the cords that make the rope, and possibly misleading us by vague resemblances, which are apt to be regarded as identities. I am not sure that there is a direct attraction of one man's feelings to those of another, like that of gravitation, or that there is a literal contagion like that which takes place in fever. Whatever be our explanation of the undoubted circumstance that men, women, and children are apt to move in masses, it must proceed on the principle that each man has, after all, an appetence swaying himself. The attraction that moves molar bodies must be a power which reaches every individual molecule. This is a circumstance commonly overlooked by historians, who write in a loose way of people being moved by sympathy without explaining what sympathy means. It may be posited in a general way, I think, that as it is an idea of an object appetible or inappetible that raises feeling, so it is an idea, it is a common idea, that raises the common feeling. If this be so, it is essential, in constructing a theory of the movement of masses, that we show how the common idea of objects appetible or inappetible arises. First, in forming his opinions, a man is apt to be swayed by a number of considerations not altogether directed to his impartial judgment. In particular, he may allow himself to believe and act simply as others do. A large body of mankind do not form their convictions on independent ground. People are often obliged to decide and act so rapidly and unexpectedly that they have not time to go round the object and survey all sides of it. They lay down inferior rules not universally applicable, though often so, and act at once upon them. How often do they allow themselves to act simply as others act? If there be an assembly of 1,000 people in a hall and a crash is heard, and one cries out, "The gallery is falling," the more easily terrified rise and rush to the door, and are followed by the whole crowd trampling on each other. We have an example of the same kind in the fear which thrills through a whole army. Some are seen to run, having suffered a defeat, and suddenly all flee in disorder. In such cases as these, there is often a brief and unnoticed ratiocination. There must be danger when so many are in trepidation. These are cases in which persons have acted rashly. But in how many cases have we all acted wisely in doing as others are seen doing, without waiting for logical proof, as when we see a crowd gathering for the defense of an injured man and we join them? Some in the end give up all independent judgment founded on reasons, and allow one or two persons to lead them, or they follow a multitude to do evil. We have here one way, though by no means the most potent, in which a community may lead the ideas and so the feelings of individuals. Secondly, a common public sentiment is usually a common appetence, producing a common belief and hope, kindling a common enthusiasm, and issuing in a common movement, which individuals join because they are heartily with it. It may spring from an evil which all feel ought to be remedied, from the sense of an oppression from which they would be delivered. Take such events as the Reformation in Europe, the rising against Charles I in England, the French Revolution, and the proclamation of independence in America. In all of these there were universal abuses and sources of irritation. There were thus seeds sown ready to spring up simultaneously under the first fostering circumstances, as the grain does in spring. Thirdly, arguments and appeals, fitted to sway our judgments and interest our feelings, float in the very air. These, pressed upon us at all times by dear friends, by ministers of religion, by orators, by patriots, must produce an effect. It was thus that at the starting of the Crusades, the people all over Europe, identifying their religion with the Holy Sepulchre, and feeling the disgrace implied in its being in the hands of the infidel, eagerly listened to the preaching of Peter the Hermit, and were carried along with the wave. It was thus that in the decadence of religion in the middle of the last century, so many were ready to be awakened by the thunders of Whitefield. Even Franklin felt the influence, and they said, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" In this way a common sentiment is created. There is often a family faith, and young people catch the spirit of fathers or mothers, of older brothers and sisters. Every parish, every county, every province, every state is apt to have its periodical excitement about some question, great or small. There are states of society in which fears are in the way, and the very air is tremulous, and there is a terror as of overhanging plague or of pestilence. In this sense, fear is infectious. There are others in which there is a stimulus given to all by the oxygenated atmosphere which they breathe. Every age has its prevailing faith, and its favored medicine for curing the ills of society or regenerating the world. Ordinary minds are sure to be sucked in by the current and go willingly along with it. Only the men of independent thought and resolute will are able to resist the swelling torrent. The schoolboy who has to oppose the practices of a set of wicked companions shows more bravery than the soldier on the battlefield. There may be as much courage shown in resisting a deluded democracy as in facing the scowl of a despot. Most of the grand movements for good in our world's history have thus been produced. I am aware that a certain class of writers in Germany, generated of the philosophic pantheism there and followed by literary men like Carlyle in England, are fond of ascribing all reformations to heroes. And doubtless great undertakings have been hatched in the brains of our great men. But, as Sir W. Hamilton has remarked, woe to the revolutionist who is not himself a creature of the revolution. If he anticipates, he is lost, for it requires what no individual can supply, a long and powerful sympathy in a nation, to untwine the ties of custom which bind a people to the established and the old. The leader in a revolution is merely the most energetic man, such as Knox, who has caught the spirit which has begun to pervade the community. If the soil is not so far prepared, the workman has, like Wycliffe, Huff, or Savonarola, to spend his life in plowing and harrowing, and it is reserved for others to see the seed spring up. But let us suppose that a public sentiment has been created. Every man's interest in the cause is increased when his wife, his family, and his immediate neighbors all feel as he does and are ready to carry him along. Each feels confirmed in his own judgment by the judgment of the rest. Were the sentiment confined to the individual, the attempt would be hopeless, but the prevalence of it stirs up action with the expectation of success. The river being started is swelled by the confluence of other streams, as when returning spring melts the snows on 100 mountains, each one of which sends on its swollen waters. The body moves on with the power of a mass, and the momentum increases the heat which is the source of the motion. Each man says to his neighbor, "Come, let us go on together," and they join hand in hand. There is now a jubilation, as at a review, and a shouting as when men go forth to battle, the reverberation from every height increasing the sound and imparting further impulse. The march is now of men in array going on to the battle, the victory, and the triumph. Section 2. Reaction of public sentiment. It is a fact that after popular opinion has run for a time in one way, it is apt to be arrested and to flow in a very different direction. And this in rural districts, in villages, in cities, in communities, in nations, in continents, in social circles and learned societies, in religious sects, in literature and the fine arts. A period of religious fervor or precision morals is apt to be followed, as we see in the reign of Charles II of England, by a time of indifference, or perhaps of infidelity, of scoffing and profanity, or profligate morality. On the other hand, an age of wild skepticism and licentiousness, as we see in the first French Revolution, brings back nations to religion or to superstition and a sober morality. A long reign of conservatism, in which every abuse is protected and every proposed change frowned down, is sure to generate an opposite force going on to reform, which, gathering to excess, bursts in a thunderstorm of political convulsion, which in its turn drives thinking men to gather round the cause of order. The world thus moves on, like light and heat, by vibrations, and is kept from stagnation like the ocean, by flows and ebbs. Even in speculative opinion we see like swingings of the pendulum. In the old earnest schools of Greece, ending in the sophists, who in their turn raised up Socrates and Plato in opposition. In the pleasure-loving Epicureans, gendering the sturdiness of the self-righteous Stoics, while the paradoxes of the Stoics strengthened the easier code of the Epicureans, in the formalism of the schoolmen calling forth the induction of Bacon, in the mathematical school of Descartes and Spinoza, leading to the experimentalism of Locke, which degenerated into the skepticism of Hume and the sensationalism of Condillac, which had to be counteracted by the a priori forms of Kant, Hegel, and Coleridge, which has sunk into the materialism of the present day. An excess of electric force at one end of a needle does not more certainly produce an opposite force at the other end than an extreme position generates its contrary in all spheres of thought and action. In an earlier part of this work, page 84, I have shown how the reaction operates in the individual, and of course it thus operates in all the individuals composing the mass. There may be lassitude produced by long excitement which has spent itself, leaving those who have been under its influence in a state of exhaustion and indisposed to exertion. The volcano has burst and the lava has cooled and become hardened. At this point, the influence of temperament and of race is apt to manifest itself. Such peoples as the French and the Irish, like the flax, being seized by the excitement sooner and losing it sooner, whereas the Scotch, like their heather, catch the fire more slowly, but continue burning for a greater length of time. But this organic wave cresting and then falling will not explain fully the reaction of a whole community or a nation. The public sentiment has been created by a felt evil to be removed or a wished-for good to be attained. The enthusiasm continues as long as the good and the evil are felt, but the feeling may die out. Those engaged in the struggle are not always satisfied with the management of it, or they are disappointed with the issue. Very often dissensions arise among them, and they quarrel about the spoils. The movement has agglomerated like a ball of snow as it rolled on, but as it enters a new season, it melts away. The soil has yielded its crop, such as it is, and it is not so ready for bearing anything new as men found it in the springtime of their zeal. It is frequently urged that these revulsions evince great weakness and contradiction in human nature. A people are mad in favor of enterprise this year, and next year all their interest in it has died down, and perhaps they are bent on something very different. But it may not have been the same people who are engaged in the action and reaction. There may have been numbers who never fell under the excitement and are not responsible either for its kindling or its extinction, and some of these may be ready to come under a new control, as at the close of the Puritan ferment, Newton and Locke took up science and philosophy, and the shopkeepers and farmers did not wish to continue any longer the war with their patrons. Nay, there may all along have been people who disapproved of the movement and the movers, and saw their failings, and who, though they durst not oppose the tide when it was strong, are ready now that the ebb has set in to occupy the ground left by the receding waters. Meanwhile, a new generation sprang up, who have never entered into the feelings of their fathers, and have feelings of their own formed in new circumstances. The new race sees the excesses of which the victorious party have been guilty. They have grievances of their own different from those of their fathers. Indeed, their grievances may refer to the conduct of their fathers. In the reactions of philosophy, idealism, or sensationalism is guilty of oversight which the other school has to correct, but in doing so has itself to be corrected by the succeeding age. As these various causes act, there is apt to be a reaction in one age against the prevailing sentiment of the preceding age. This is commonly initiated by youths of from 18 to 25 years of age, but may not be carried by them till they are considerably advanced in life, by which time the seeds of a new crop may be deposited to choke and to kill that which they would reap. It was thus that about the year 1830, when the radical wave in church and state was at the highest in Great Britain, there appeared at the back of it a hollow in the form of a revived ritualism and a strong political conservatism. At a later date, we have seen that in the midst of the Catholic revival at Oxford, there was hatched an infidelity which has burst forth like a viper. Section 3. An unwritten chapter in political economy. Political economy inquires into the laws regulating the accumulation and distribution of wealth. Some would say of national wealth, but surely religion, geographical science, and the spread of general philanthropy will prepare men to look to the world's wealth rather than a nation's wealth, and lead them to oppose every measure inconsistent with the general welfare, even though it should seem to be favorable to a given state. The science seeks to estimate the influence of physical agents, such as soil and climate, and the operation of such economical relations as labor and capital, looking incidentally at government and laws. But it has scarcely endeavored to estimate the varied motives by which mankind are swayed. It has commonly assumed, in an avowed or in a tacit way, that mankind are swayed merely or mainly by self-interest, by adding, so far as they know, what their interest is. But this is not true of human nature. Every man is no doubt largely swayed by a desire to secure happiness, and with multitudes the supreme end of their existence is to secure as many physical indulgences as possible. But the great body of mankind are swayed, less or more, by other considerations. Even general benevolence, especially in Christian countries, is an element of great potency in awakening human activities, in raising hospitals, asylums, penitentiaries, in establishing churches, educational institutions, lower and higher, and in sending out missions to foreign countries to Christianize and to civilize rude and barbarous nations. Patriotism, too, has had a mighty influence in calling forth and directing human energy. It has, on the one hand, united men in strong bonds, and on the other, led to devastating wars, and both these have been swaying the destinies of the race. Then domestic affection, the love of parents and children, of brothers and sisters, of husband and wife, of relatives and friends, of companions and neighbors, have together had nearly as much influence as a narrow selfishness in leading and guiding the exertions of men, mostly for good, at times for evil, when they lead to jealousies and quarrels. Even selfishness may take 1,000 different forms. It may be the love of money, or the love of sensual indulgences, of showy dress, of good eating, of family aggrandizement, of social position, of a fine dwelling, of large landed property, of beautiful horses, of musical concerts, of theatrical exhibitions, or of the fine arts. All of these, and every one of them, may tend to accumulate or distribute wealth, but they do so in very different ways, and they call forth very different kinds of activity, and foster very varied callings and professions to gratify the tastes implied. The desire to have a pleasant beverage, stimulating but not intoxicating, is gratified by tea and coffee, which have to be brought from distant countries, and this leads to the employment of merchants and mariners, which brings the ends of the earth nearer each other. I have supposed that the motives last named operate selfishly, that we follow them because of the pleasure afforded. But these and other motives act independent of any idea of pleasure or anything without, or independent of themselves, and impel men each to ends of his own, and each end secures activities in a particular line. The craving for excitement fosters theaters and balls, and gambling and horse races, and calls forth a body of men and women who have to get up the amusements. The love of education leads to the institution of schools and colleges, and thus calls forth a body of teachers whose office it is to spread intelligence. Where there is a general love of art, as in Italy, painters and sculptors spring up and spread around them a refining influence. In all countries, religion has had a mighty sway over the character, the tastes, and employments of the people, in some cases fostering only slavish subjection of the spirit and ghostly fears which prostrate the energy, but in others rousing the dormant intellect and kindling the highest aspiration and noblest affections. In the Church of Rome, in its more exalted manifestations, there is encouragement given to all that may gratify the aesthetic senses and excite the imagination. Among Protestants, free thought and intelligence are called into exercise, and these lead to independent action, to industry and perseverance, and all the hardy virtues which spring from these habits. Now, political economists should look to these as well as to other agencies at work. They cannot explain the direction which human activity takes in different countries unless they estimate them. Certainly they will give a very narrow, or rather an utterly perverted view of the causes of the production and expenditure of wealth, if they proceed on the principle that all men are governed merely by self-interest. Not that they may be required to enter on the discussion of human motives metaphysically, or give a refined analysis of their nature, or of the elements involved in them. But they should consider their operation in a general way, observe their sameness and their differences, give some sort of classification of them, and estimate the action and influence of each class in different ages and countries. I am not competent to write this chapter in political science. I must content myself with pointing out the want and leave others to supply it, giving only such examples as may show what is meant. What a contrast between England, with its love of real comforts and its sense of the binding power of morality, and France, with its love of glory and its restlessness. The character of the one nation has compelled it to seek commercial greatness and internal security, whereas that of the other has compelled it to military exploits and internal changes. What a difference between Scotland and Spain, though Buckle imagined them to be alike because both have had a reverence for religion. But how different the religion! The faculties of the one people sharpened by great religious conflicts and the reading of the Word of God have been exerted in independent thought, in founding schools and colleges, in agricultural and commercial industry, which has overcome the disadvantage of climate, whereas in the other country the people, with a desire beneath for freedom, have allowed themselves, till of late years, to be trampled on by civil and ecclesiastical despotism. Holland and Switzerland will occur to everyone as examples of intelligence awakened and given a special direction to industries. In the one to a battling with the threatening ocean and to extensive shipping, and in the other to the works of art which can be performed in winter when the climate does not admit of outdoor employments. Everyone notices the difference between the United States South and the United States North. In the former, the white population looking with contempt on labor and cultivating social kindness and hospitality. The latter with intellects sharpened to every kind of active pursuit. The wealth of the one is different, both in the collection and distribution, from that of the other. The prevailing swaying motives of a nation determine its character. They do more. They determine its condition. The country is in the best state in which the motives have the same place absolutely and relatively that they have in man's original or in his regenerated and restored nature. As the king and governor, lifting his head as a tower above all the rest, should be the moral regulator, issuing commands and subordinating all to itself. This ruling power on earth should point upward to the power in heaven from which it derives its power, and this will prompt to adoration and worship, and the erection of temples with spires pointing to the skies. The individual man, while he has a business to which he must attend, is all the better for possessing tastes which he has pleasure in gratifying, such as music or painting or reading. When this authority rules, there is room for every sort of activity and energy. So a nation will prosper the more when, besides its necessary bond of self-defense, it has great causes with which it is identified, say, religion or education or literature or liberty, and it will accomplish great ends by its continued and combined efforts. But while a nation is one and has a head, it has also many members, and each acts best when it acts in its own way. A community is not in its healthiest state when everyone acts as every other acts. The result is a dead uniformity, as in China, a level plain in which there may be fertility, but no fresh air or pleasant variety of hill and dale, of peaks and passes. Individualism should have a place in every advancing community. There should be men who think for themselves, who act for themselves, who follow their own line of thought and investigation. These are the men who make discoveries and produce the highest works of genius, say, in literature, in science, in the fine arts, and in useful inventions. These are the men who give us original thoughts, who make discoveries and open new paths. At times their path may run out into eccentricities, and they do not adjust themselves to their age, which may combine to crush them. But if there is any spring in them, they will resist and compel mankind to give them their place, and if rejected and despised in their own age, they will be deified by posterity. It is by a combined centrifugal and centripetal force that a nation is made to take a progressive course. In the past age, there has been a disposition to look exclusively to the intellectual powers as calling forth the energies of a community. But there is a prior question: what calls the intellect into exercise? An honest answer to this question will bring us to moral causes, probably beyond this, to religious causes, as awakening individuals or a whole people into life, and then the intellectual powers carry on and perform the work, and in doing so, unfortunately, become dissociated both from religion and morality, and may be exercised in clothing vice with all the graces of poetry, or in undermining the foundations of religion. Such men as David Hume and Robert Burns could not have appeared in Scotland unless there had been an awakening caused by the religious struggles of the previous ages. Yet both helped to undermine the faith and the purity by which the Reformations were characterized. The rising generation, trained in homes where religion and morals have been carefully enforced, are apt to complain of the restrictions which have been laid upon them, and to imagine and argue that under a more liberal system the good would have been more attractive to them. But they may find as they advance in life that a greater liberty ends in licentiousness in the generation that follow, and the difficulty then is to get back the high standard which has been lost. A simple fixed faith and a rigid obedience are essential potencies in the training of the youthful mind. Those who abandon their faith, but are still hoping to save morality, may discover that when the religion departs, the morality is apt to go with it. But thus the ages swing between belief and unbelief. Feeling the creed to be too strict, they give it up, but are made to feel in the next generation that, after all, they cannot do without it, and they have to call it back to their aid. In such circumstances, wisdom consists in training the young in law rigid as the bones of our frame, but with love as its life. This requires no reaction, and is every way best for the economic as well as for the moral and religious good of the community. Conclusion. The emotions may well be carefully studied, for they constitute the main means of our happiness or our misery. They are not to be eradicated, but guided. Yet why so harsh? Why with remorseless knife hone to the stem prune back each bough and bud? I thought the task of education was to strengthen, not to crush, to train and feed each subject towards fulfillment of its nature, according to the mind of God, revealed in laws congenial with every kind and character of man. The emotions are all good in themselves. They all tend to promote our own welfare or that of others. They attach us to the earth on which we dwell and to our fellow men, and make us feel our dependence on God. But they do not contain in themselves any principle of control, so they may lead to evil as well as good. They are to be guided on the one hand by our intelligence, which tells us what things are, and on the other hand by our conscience, which announces what things ought to be. When so ruled, they give a high elevation to our nature, and as they have descended like the rains from the sky, so their breathings mount upwards to heaven and to God. The ideas to which the mind of man can rise are said to be the true, the beautiful, the good, the three rays with diverse colors which constitute the light. We owe the first of these to the intellect, the last to the moral reason, while it is the office of the emotions to reveal to us the beautiful, or rather, as I call it, the lovely, so fitted to render the good and the true attractive. End of section 22. End of the Emotions by James McCosh.